I would like to welcome you to this journey which goes deep into the ancient past. In today's world, there exists a popular movement by people concluding Alexander the Great had not only many lovers, but several man and boy lovers as well. Some recent publications go into detail concerning Alexander's love affair with a young Persian eunuch named Bagoas. More recently, there has been a stir accusing Alexander of being a cross-dresser and even a transvestite. Indeed, there is currently a vast promotion to degrade this amazing ancient king, attempting to bring him down to the lowest level of condemnation and unfair criticism. What truly riled us was the Oliver Stone movie showcasing scenes with a Pluto kneeling beside Alexander as he is passing his last dying breath, saying to him, "You've made me so happy. Oh, I am so happy. You've made me so happy." You can also see a dancer by the name of Bagoas on YouTube who performs belly dances while wearing costumes which I assume are supposed to represent ancient dress, all with the association of Alexander the Great. Paul and I have solved many ancient riddles before and felt it necessary to present this information now because when we made our conclusions concerning this matter about 25 years ago, there was no internet and nowhere near as much information available to mislead the novice. So now we must return to many of the same trails we blazed over 2 decades ago because we felt the need to set the record straight for all time's sake and give finality to false expressions and put an end to the people who slander the ancient Macedonian hero Alexander Magnus. We will now close the book on all the controversy as we examine the ancient sources and dissect the information in our undeniable fashion. When we give the final word on any subject, there is truly nothing else left to be said. Unfortunately, this will require a long attention span because the only way we know how to approach this is to jump back and forth between the ancient historians as well as the subjects concerning our overall issue. So now, let us dive headfirst into the data and start with an obscure Greek historian. Okay, we're going to begin here with our first classical source from the Loeb Classical Library put out by the Harvard University Press. All right, and this writer's name is Athenaeus. He's writing sometime in the early 3rd century A.D., probably sometime around 210 to 220 A.D. We don't know for sure. He wrote a series of books called the Deipnosophists. And the Deipnosophists were conversationalists, connoisseurs. They kicked back and he would tell stories, and he covers so many different subjects. And I really love his work. I use his information a lot. And what we're going to do here is we're going to start in Volume 6, Book 13, on page 251. States here in Chapter 603, okay, beginning right up here, all right? And we're going to do this because of the picture that we're going to paint towards the end. So it's going to be important later. And among the barbarians, the Celts also, though they have very beautiful women, enjoy boys more, so that some of them often have 2 lovers to sleep with on their beds of animal skins. As for the Persians, Herodotus says they learned the use of boys from the Greeks. I got to pause here for a second. I've read Herodotus at least, cover to cover, at least 6 times, and I never saw this. And if anyone can show me where in Herodotus this is, what chapter and verse, I sure would like to know, okay? But we want to remember the passage as it implies the Persians learned the use of boys from the Greeks. I want to make note of this because this is going to be important later, all right? And we're going to pick up right here. King Alexander also was madly devoted to boys. Dicarchus, at any rate, in his book on the sacrifice at Ilium, says that he was so overcome with love for the eunuch Bagoas that, in full view of the entire theater, he, bending over, caressed Bagoas fondly, and when the audience clapped and shouted in applause, he, nothing loath, again bent over and kissed him. All right, so now we're bringing Bagoas into the picture, all right? And Bagoas is going to be one of our main characters, all right? So bear with me now. We're going to see here that the Greek runs pretty much even with the English, not like Latin, where half a page of Latin is a whole page of English. All right, we're going to pick up right here, same place, and like I say, you're just going to have to bear with me. Philopius, de Enigmanos, Kai Alexandros, Obasileus, de Kearchlos, Gotni, into peritas in Iliotusius, Bagoeto, Enochio, Autos, Aton, Fasen, Atasnai, Os, Inopsai, Theatro, Olokata, Thelian, Auton, Anakla, Santa Kai. All right, here you see Bagoas the eunuch. Here's Alexander king, and so it wasn't uncommon for someone to kiss the main characters or actors after a grand performance at the theater. All right, so that's not my issue here. What we're going to look at is what Athenaeus writes concerning Alexander was madly devoted to boys, and he was. Okay, so overcome with love for Bagoas? Well, I don't know. Okay, all right, but the thing about it is there's several words for love in the Greek language. All right. And do you see any of them here? Did you hear any of them? Did you hear the word eros? Did you hear that? Isn't that what the English is implying over here? In love for the eunuch Bagoas. All right? Something more than just love. Now, my Greek is a bit rough because I'm self-taught. All right? And to confirm my conclusions, I requested the help of probably the top Greek scholar in the world over. And her name is Maria Anna Kasimanakis, all right? And here's what she's got to say, all right? Now, she lives, Maria Anna Kasimanakis lives in New York City, and she works for the Greek Orthodox Diocese of North America, okay? So who better in the world for me to consult with concerning my weaknesses in ancient Greek, because I have a very difficult time with Greek verbiage, all right? Greek verbs are just out there, all right? And here's what she says. The very first word, Philopius, means friend of boys. The word ekmanos includes the word mania in it. The words that indicate that are phasen atasai, which mean it is said that he was defeated by Bagoas. Defeated is used here to mean that Alexander succumbed to Bagoas. It just says that Alexander, a friend of boys, was taken so much by Bagoas, I would presume by Bagoas' performance in the theater, and kissed him in front of the audience. Nothing about love or eros. Now let's put that. Nothing about love, any kind of love, or eros. Yet here, in our English translation from Harvard University, it says overcome with love for Bagoas. All right? And I want to thank Ms. Kasimanakis for her help on this. Thank you, Maria. And we sure do appreciate your help on this. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to now introduce the works of Quintus Curtius, actually Quintus Curtius Rufus, who was writing probably about the middle of the 1st century AD, probably around 50 AD or so, and this is from Harvard University Classics. And we're going to point out many different things, and this is going to get lengthy, and it's going to get complicated, and you're just going to have to bear with me, all right? But we are now searching for Bagoas. All right, now we're going to begin by reading the frontispiece inside the flyleaf, all right, of the jacket. Quintus Curtius was apparently a rhetorician who lived in the 1st century of the Roman Empire and early in the reign of Claudius, 41 to 54 AD. Wrote a history of Alexander the Great in 10 books in clear and picturesque style for Latin readers. The first 2 books have not survived. Our narrative begins with events in 333 BC. And there is material missing from books 5, 6, and 10. One of his main sources is Plutarch, who about 300 BC had made Alexander's career a matter of marvelous adventure. All right, continuing. Curtius arranged his material well enough, but is not a critical historian, and in his desire to entertain and to stress the personality of Alexander, he over-elaborates effective scenes, omits much that is important for history, and does not worry about chronology or political organization, not being himself a politician. He has, moreover, little expert knowledge of military matters or geography, but he does not invent things except speeches and letters inserted into the narrative by traditional habit. I copy more than I believe, he says. Three special features of his story are narrative of exciting experiences, development of a hero's character, and a disposition to moralize. His history is one of the 5 extant works on which we rely for the career of Alexander the Great. Okay, remember that, 5. All right, we're going to look at those 5 here a little bit later. All right. So now we're going to go to Volume 2, Book 6, where Nabrzanyes introduces Bagoas to Alexander. All right. And we're going to start right here, okay? Now they had come to the city of Hyrcania, in which the palace of Darius had been. There, Nabrzanyes, having received a safe conduct, met him, Alexander, bringing great gifts. Among these was a eunuch of among these was Bagoas, a eunuch of remarkable beauty, and in the very flower of boyhood, who had been loved by Darius and was afterwards loved by Alexander. And it was especially because of the boy's entreaties that he, Alexander, was led to pardon Nabrzanyes. So here we see the introduction of Bagoas, a handsome boy. And he was loved by Darius and later loved by Alexander. Well, are we accusing Darius at this point of child molesting here? We have to remember, as we will see later, Darius had a beautiful wife and 2 lovely daughters. All right? And we're implying here that Darius was, intimate with Bagoas. All right? And Bagoas was a eunuch, evidently an effeminate eunuch. Now, in my first outline for this presentation, I broke down all the Latin words of Curtius to show how several of the key words could easily be misrepresented with the English translations given in these Harvard books. However, my director, Paul, thought it was way too time-consuming, totally boring, and way too academic for any sort of entertainment value. So I'll just point out a couple of key words and what their alternative meaning given in the context could just as easily be translated as, and we will see why it isn't necessary to break down these Latin passages that I'm about to show you. All right? Now, we have here specie, handsome, with a singular eunuch, spado. That's where we get our word spade from. And he was a flourishing, youthful boy, or in boyhood, actually. Now, the word asuret is translated here as loved by Darius, but it also means he was growing up under Darius. So, given the same root stem, if we use the same system for asuvit, then we get that he later grew up under Alexander and was close to him. So this whole passage could have been translated without the word loved in it. But it doesn't matter, okay? However, I wish to point out here, this translation of Curtius is most certainly making the accusation that Darius III is molesting a child, and then Alexander the Great is molesting the same child. All right, I'm going to make note of this because we're going to see what happens to a Persian nobleman here in just a few more pages of the same book. And I'm going to bring in another character and another story here to prove a point. And the rest of this narrative continues here featuring Thalestris, the Amazon queen. All right, queen of the Amazons, and she comes to Alexander here. All right. And she wants to have a child by him, all right? And the story picks up. I'm not going to go right there. I'm going to go to the next page, all right? Okay, here, we're going to look at it. With fearless expression, Thalestris gazed at the king carefully, surveying his person, which did not by any means correspond to the fame of his exploits. For all the barbarians feel veneration for the majestic presence, and I believe that only believe that only those are capable of great deeds whom nature has deigned to adorn with extraordinary physical attractiveness. However, on being asked whether she wished to make any request, she did not hesitate to confess that she had come to share children with the king, being worthy that he should beget from her heirs to his kingdom, that she would retain any female offspring, but would return a male to his father. Alexander asked her whether she wished to serve in war with him, but she, giving as an excuse that she had left her realm without a guard, persisted in asking that he should not suffer her to go away disappointed in her hope. The passion of the woman, being as she was more keen for love than the king, compelled him to remain there for a few days. 13 days were spent in satisfying her desire. Then she went to her kingdom, and the king to Parthian. All right? And then there's a passage there, how Alexander gave loose rein to his passions, and that he changed, that he just went nuts, okay? He just went nuts, okay? So we have him spending 13 days here with the Amazon queen. And I'm concerned that Alexander, who prided himself over the speedy movement and how he took care of his men, 13 days while feeding and nourishing an army of 40,000 plus, just to have relations with the Thalestris for 13 days. And Curtius writes that she left no guard for her kingdom, and so why did she spend 13 days with Alexander, let alone the fact that she'd had to travel at least 4 to 6 days each way just to make the trip? Now, if anyone cares to do the research, the mere existence of the Amazons is questioned throughout ancient history as well as modern history. There's a big debate over that, but I'm not going there. I'm going to let the scholars fight that battle for us. All right? And so now we read in the next page, picking up on page 51, sentence 8, right here, okay? 365 concubines, the same number that Darius had, filled his palace, attended by herds of eunuchs, also accustomed to prostitute themselves. All right, so now Quintus Curtius is accusing Alexander the Great of providing 365 concubines, the same number that Darius had, but it doesn't say they're the same ones. It just said filled the palace, and that he had herds of eunuchs attending them, who were also accustomed to prostitute. The eunuchs, also accustomed to prostitute, but were they merely pimps working in the profession of sex? All right, prostitution or pimps? Huh. Okay, and we're going to go next to page 475 of the same book. Concerning Bagoas the eunuch, and this is the same volume. This is in book 10, chapter 1, verse 25. Appears in volume 2 on page 475, and this is the primary source suggesting the relationship, the intimate relationship between Alexander and Bagoas, lovers as such. Picking up the story of how a Persian nobleman named Arsenies, a wealthy and good man of noble birth, is being vexed by those against him, primarily Bagoas, in order to put him to death. All right, now we also need to understand that this is just a little while after. This is not like years down the road. This is, and at this point, Bagoas is still a young boy, okay? He's still a young boy. And we're going to start right here. But this great generosity of the barbarian was the cause of his death. For when he had honored all the friends of the king with gifts beyond their highest hopes, to Bagoas, a eunuch who had won the regard of Alexander through prostitution, he paid no honor, and on being admonished by some, that Bagoas was dear to Alexander, replied that he was honoring the friends of the king, not his harlots, and that it was not the custom of the Persians to mate with males who made females of themselves by prostitution. Well, hey, just a couple of pages ago, weren't we accusing Darius III of exactly that? In the same book, the same writer. So, whose harlots is Orsanes talking about? He's talking about Bagoas' harlots? All right? If you translate this different, Bagoas could just as easily have been a pimp who supplied Alexander's army with hundreds of prostitutes. The Latin obsequial corpus, sex is a business, but it doesn't matter, okay? And it won't matter in the end. But how do people miss this? Again, prostitution means sex as a business. After all, what is a eunuch in the first place? All right? For sex? I don't think so. But quite the opposite, I would conclude. And we understand here that Bagoas is conniving against Orsanes. All right? Now let's go to the next page. And we're going to start up here. Orsanes, as yet, was not suspected, but nevertheless was already less esteemed, for he was secretly being incriminated without being aware of the hidden danger. And that most shameless harlot, not forgetting his deception even amid debauchery and the endurance of shame, whenever he had aroused the king's passion for himself, charged Orsanes now with avarice, sometimes even with treason. All right? And so here we see he's conniving, and the rest of it down here is where Bagoas and Alexander were entering into the tomb of Cyrus. Okay, so we're still in Babylon, or Susa, what? And we're still looking at this, and we're going to go to the next page. All right, and this is the conviction of Orsanes. He, meaning Bagoas, had already aroused the king's mind to anger when those to whom he had entrusted the same business arrived. On one side Bagoas, on the other those whom he had suborned or bribed, filled the king's ears with false charges. Before Orsanes suspected that he was being accused, he was delivered into bondage. Not content with the punishment of an innocent man, the eunuch laid his hand upon him as he was about to be executed. Catch this close. Orsanes, with a glance at him, said, I had heard that women once reigned in Asia. This, however, is something new, for a eunuch to reign. So much was the end of the noblest of the Persians, remarkable kindness towards the king, and this is, so Alexander had him put to death for really nothing, all right? And here we see that Bagoas had connived, and this is important. What Orsanes says here, I had heard that women once reigned in Asia. This, however, is something new, a eunuch to reign. I want you to keep this in mind and make note of it, because we're going to expose another paradox here in just a little bit concerning Bagoas as a eunuch that reigned. All right? Okay, recapping for just a moment, we have that we don't want to forget that Alexander is devoted to boys, and we have a Persian nobleman that has never heard of a eunuch ruling over Asia or having anything to do with the royal house. This is something new. Now here I'm showing you a list of the 5 ancient historians where pretty much all of the information concerning Alexander the Great is recorded. And I've listed them here in their timeline and sequence. The green are in Greek and the red are in Latin. Diodorus Siculus writing about 55 BC. Now, for some reason, they don't have Strabo in there, but I'm putting Strabo in there, writing it around 10 to 7 BC or so, because he writes so much about Alexander the Great. And very good writer. All right, we're going to look at some of that later, okay? And there you have Quintus Curtius, who we've just been through, writing around 44, 50 AD or so. Plutarch comes next, who is writing in Greek around 45 AD, about the same time Quintus Curtius is. Next comes Arrian, writing in Greek around 140 AD. We're not sure exactly when he's writing. It could have been around 150 AD, give or take 10, 15 years. And last on the list, number 5, is Justin, who's writing 3rd or 4th century AD, and he's writing in Latin. Okay, this is the list here of where we get our information, our classical information concerning Alexander the Great. This is the list. Now we're going to look at our next classical source, Arrian. And Arrian, as we stated earlier, is writing around sometime close to 150 AD. All right, and he writes a lot about Alexander's travels and battles in India. All right, well, does he mention Bagoas? Does he write anything about Bagoas? Well, yes, he does. We're going to look at it right here. All right, and we're going to blow this up. This is on page 175 here. All right, and this is a portion of a lengthy letter that Alexander the Great wrote to Darius III. Okay, my father was murdered by conspirators, whom you Persians organized, as you yourselves boasted in your letters to all the world. You assassinated Arses with the help of Bagoas, and seized the throne unjustly and in actual contradiction to Persian law. Well, here we have Bagoas, but that can't be the same Bagoas, can it? If he killed Philip II, if he's accused by Alexander the Great of having to been a part of the assassination of Philip II, it obviously can't be the same Bagoas. All right, so this is Bagoas number 2, okay? And this is only a few years before Orsides. Now, this Bagoas had killed 2 kings. All right, in the classical ancient, the Encyclopedia of Names from 1899 that I often refer to, said that this Bagoas was an Egyptian eunuch in the service of Artaxerxes Acus, which is Artaxerxes the third. And he put to death Artaxerxes III and Artaxerxes IV. And he put Darius III on the throne. Okay, so he killed, let's back it up now, let's retrace. Don't get confused on me now. You're going to have plenty of time to get confused as we go into more Bagoases. Trust me. This is Bagoas number 2. Bagoyim, we probably should say. Bagoyim number 2. He killed Artaxerxes III. He killed Artaxerxes IV. He killed Philip. He's accused here of having to been in the conspiracy to kill Philip II, and he put Darius III on the throne. And this happened just a few years before Arsanes was fixing to be put to the sword, being put to death because of the young boy Bagoas. Well, how come Arsanes didn't know this? All right, now we're going back because I had heard that women once reigned in Asia. This, however, is something new for a eunuch to reign. And here we have a Bagoas, which is a eunuch. It's a eunuch of the same name, and Orsanes didn't even know about this? Well, why not? Why didn't Orsanes? How come when in Quintus Curtius we see that this Orsanes didn't know something that had just a very, very crucial importance had happened just a few years before, and this man didn't get it. He wasn't there. How come? All right, so let's go a little bit more into Arrian. All right, here we go. And these Harvard Loeb classical books are just loaded with great footnotes and great appendices. They're really complete. And and we're going to start right here, okay? We're going to start right there. So there were probably far more books on Alexander than we happen to know of. Why were they continually produced? There were no archives from which new evidence could be elicited, and in any case, as the younger Pliny implies, all right, pretty much volume 8, section 12, research was only thought necessary when a historian attempted to describe contemporary events for the first time. Otherwise, it was enough to collate the old accounts. Right here. New writers, therefore, usually aimed at dressing up the facts in a form that would give pleasure. So what does this mean? And this is on page 542 of the second volume. Now, if you figure like, well, how in the world did I get to page 542? Because I read it's on 543. I read the 542 pages in front of it. Now, let's move forward. So we see here now, we're getting a little bit confused. We got two Bagoases with a cross timeline. One of them is a murderer, usurper of power, evidently from Egyptian extraction, but lived in Persia under the kings. And then we have the boy Bagoas, Bagoyim. Now I'm going to introduce our next source, Diodorus Siculus. And you got to remember that I've been accused time and time again of working backwards. Harry Hubbard is always working backwards. I tell you it's the truth, because when I'm working with ancient history, I have to go backwards. And I have to jump around to cover my subjects. But now I must digress as we look at the works of Diodorus Siculus, who is writing, like I said earlier, between 60, 55, 54 BC or so. Generally accepted during the time of Julius Caesar. And he is on record as one of the main sources for Alexander the Great. Historical sources of Alexander the Great, all right? So here, going to start. This is out of volume 8, page 131, chapter 17, book 17, chapter 5, okay? This is, as our narrative is now to treat the kingdom of the Persians, we must go back a little to pick up the thread. Well, Diodorus is working backwards also, isn't he? While Philip was still king, Aucus, who is Artaxerxes III, ruled the Persians and oppressed his subjects cruelly and harshly. Since his savage disposition made him hated, the Chiliarch Bagoas, right here, Chiliarch means military commander, Bagoas, a eunuch in physical fact, but a militant rogue in disposition, killed him by poison administered by a certain physician, and placed upon the throne the youngest of his sons, Arses. So that would be Artaxerxes IV. He similarly made away with the brothers of the new king, who were barely of age, in order that the young man might be isolated and tractable to his control. So not only did he kill two kings, he also killed the brothers of Arses, which we have to assume if it's sons, that would mean plural, at least two more. So now the count's up to what, 5 or 6 that he's murdered. He similarly made away with the brothers of the new king, who were barely of age, in order that the young man might be isolated and tractable to his control. But the young king let it be known that he was offended at Bagoas's previous outrageous behavior, and was prepared to punish the author of these crimes. So Bagoas anticipated his intentions and killed Arses and his children also. So golly, so children is in plural there. So we have to assume that now his body count is up to what, 8, 9, 10? Also, while he was still in the 3rd year of his reign, the royal house was thus extinguished, and there was no one in direct line, next page, descent to claim the throne. Instead, Bagoas selected a certain Darius, a member of the court circle, and secured the throne for him. He was the son of Athenaeus and grandson of that Athenaeus, who was a brother of Artaxerxes, who had been king. As to Bagoas, an odd thing happened to him, and one to point a moral. Pursuing his habitual savagery, he attempted to remove Darius, this is Darius III, by poison. The plan leaked out, however, and the king, calling upon Bagoas, as it were, to drink to him a toast, and handing him his own cup, compelled him to take his own medicine. Ooh, okay. So here we have this Bagoas, who is evidently a mass murderer, serial killer, being killed by Darius III. Now I'm going to step aside here. I'm going to jump up. This is volume 8, page 339, book 17, chapter 77. And we're going to read it here. Same book, Diodorus Siculus. When Alexander returned to Hyrcania, there came to him the queen of the Amazons named Thalestris, who ruled all the country between the rivers of Phasis and Thermodon. Let's look at that first sentence again. When Alexander returned to Hyrcania. Well, did we see the word returned in Quintus Curtius? No, we did not. So would it make more sense that Alexander had returned to Hyrcania? Well, yeah, it would. Rather than he was there the first time, he returned to Hyrcania. So this is a big difference in what Quintus Curtius says, isn't it? This means that Alexander is there for the second time. Let's continue. She was remarkable for beauty and for bodily strength, and was admired by her countrywomen for bravery. She had left the bulk of her army on the frontier of Hyrcania and had, let's jump to the next page, arrived with an escort of 300 Amazons in full armor. The king marveled at the unexpected arrival and the dignity of the women. When he asked Thalestris why she had come, she replied that it was for the purpose of getting a child. He had shown himself the greatest of all men in his achievements, and she was superior to all women in strength and courage, so that presumably the offspring of such outstanding parents would surpass all other mortals in excellence. At this the king was delighted and granted her request, and consorted with her for 13 days. There we see 13 days again. After which he honored her with fine gifts and sent her home. So here we see another source for the 13 days. Quintus Curtius, Diodorus Siculus. But we didn't see that in Arrian, did we? But Arrian sticks more towards the battles in India. All right, let's go next. Okay, this is on page 340. Next page over. And this is in the footnotes. This Amazon visit was a part of the Alexander tradition, which Diodorus followed. Curtius and Justin, both of whom give also the length of the queen's stay as 13 days. Justin explains, ut est visa uterum impassa. Basically, that means the visit was to satisfy her womb. Arrian mentions Amazons only in other contexts and expresses the doubt that any still existed, especially since they were not mentioned by Aristobulus or Ptolemy. Plutarch, in his Alexander, gives a full list of authorities in favor of or opposed to the visit, but doubts the story because it is poorly attested. not because Amazons did not exist. Disbelief in Amazons as such is a modern phenomena. We want to note this carefully because of what we're going to see upcoming. We just want to present these stories, each one of them, and what these ancient writers say, so that we can analyze the contradictions within them. So stay with me. If you're not confused yet, you're going to be confused. Just stay with me, and I'm going to try to make sense for this of all this for you. All right, I'm stepping aside for a moment concerning the Bagoyim. I'm going to introduce to you the geography of Strabo. And like I said previously, Strabo records a lot about Alexander the Great. He's writing about 10 BC or so in Greek from Alexandria. His work is widely accepted and respected. He's just a great author. He's one of my favorites. And we're going to see how he treats the Amazon Queen story. All right, picking up on Volume 5, Book 11, Chapter 5, page 237, reading about the Amazons. At any rate, the founding of cities and the giving of names to them are ascribed to the Amazons, as for instance, Ephesus and Smyrna, and Simea and Myrina. And so are tombs and other monuments, and Themyscira, and the plains about Thermodon, and the mountains that lie above them are all by all writers mentioned as having belonged to the Amazons. But they say that the Amazons were driven out of these places. Only a few writers make assertions as to where they are at the present time, but their assertions are without proof and beyond belief, as in the case of Thalestria, queen of the Amazons, with whom they say Alexander associated in Hyrcania and had intercourse for the sake of offspring. For this assertion is not generally accepted. Indeed, of the numerous historians, those who care most for truth do not make the assertion, nor do those who are most trustworthy mention any such thing, nor do those who tell the story agree in their statements. Plutarch says that Thalestria set out from the Caspian Gates and Thermodon and visited Alexander. But the distance from the Caspian country to Thermodon is more than 6,000 stadia, which is over 700 miles, English miles. The stories that have been spared far and wide with a view to glorifying Alexander are not accepted by all, and their fabricators were men who cared for flattery rather than truth. So there we have it. I'm now returning to the Bagoyim, the subject of the Bagoyim. And I'm going to feature this book, The Ancient Near East, published in 1958, Princeton University Press. Very interesting book. A lot of detail of ancient unknown history and disregarded history, just very obscure. And I want to point out now that modern historians have found a couple of more Bagoyim. Or Bagoases. I don't like the word Bagoases because it takes away from Bagoas. I'm trying to make this less confusing. So that would mean that we'd have 4 Bagoyim at this point. And I think maybe I found another one. Okay? I'm going to go to page 279 in this book, under the chapter of Aramaic letters from Elephantine on papyri. All right? Let's read it. Petition for authorization to rebuild the temple of Yahweh. Now, a lot of people may recognize that term there, Yahweh, and who that is. The temple of Yahweh. A well-preserved papyrus with writing on both sides. Apparently a copy of one sent to Jerusalem. Note the date, 407 BC. Okay, so this is a temple of Yahoo, and its inscription in Aramaic. This was taken from Aramaic. To our Lord Bagoas, governor of Judah. So now we have a Bagoas that's governor of Judah. Your servants, Yadoni and his colleagues, the priests who are in the fortress of Elephantine, may the God of heaven seek after the welfare of our Lord exceedingly at all times, and give you favor before King Darius and the nobles 1,000 times more than now. May you be happy and healthy at all times. Now your servant Yadoni and his colleagues dispose as follows in the month of Tammuz, and it goes on and on. It's a very long, lengthy letter. I'm just showing you this because now we have a Bagoas that is governor of Judah. And look at the date, 407 BC. So when we're talking about King Darius there, which King Darius are we talking about? We're talking about Darius II. This is very important. All right? Very important. Now let's look at the next one here. And this is out of the next page from the Aramaic inscriptions on papyri. Advice of the governors of Judah and Samaria to the Jews of Elephantine. And anyone who studies ancient history knows that the word Jew pops up, and it can mean Judah, it can mean Judean, it can mean Yehudi, it can mean several different things. It most likely does not mean Israelis, okay? Here, let's read it. Memorandum of what Bagoas and Delilah said to me. Let this be an inscription to you in Egypt to say before Arsames about the house of offering of the God of heaven, which had been in existence in the fortress of Elephantine since ancient times, before Cambyses, and was destroyed by that wretch Vitornag in the year 14 of King Darius, to rebuild it on its site as it was before, and the meal offering and incense to be made on that altar as it used to be. Well, you got me. I'm not sure if this is Bagoyim number 5. If somebody were to argue that this is Bagoyim number 6, they could do it. They're talking about the year 14 of King Darius, but they're also talking since before Cambyses and was destroyed by the wretch Vitornag. This could actually mean King Darius I, because Aramaic was used at that time, and it could very well be. I'm leaving it wide open. I'm sticking at 5 Bagoyim, and somebody else could argue that point. Okay, now we're going to look at a very famous ancient author, Plutarch, and Plutarch's Lives. He writes so much, it's just incredible. And my copy here is printed in 1840. So I have a big respect for older books which haven't been tainted with the aftermath of World War II, or where modern publishers who choose to change or distort the ancient writers. But 150, 160 years ago, their information was kept as pristine as possible. Okay? And we're going to begin by going to page 242. And Plutarch, he is critical. He's critical of his information. He's critical of himself, actually. And he will give the pro and the con. Okay, so here we're going to start right here. According to Eratosthenes, Olympias, when she conducted Alexander on his way in his first expedition, privately discovered to him the secret of his birth, and exhorted him to behave in a dignity suitable to his divine extraction. And it says others say that this is absolutely wrong. Okay? So it says here that Alexander was born on the 6th of July. Some sources say that he was born on the 8th of July, or in June. Who cares? Now, we're going to look at page 246. Alexander gained from him, talking about Aristotle, Alexander gained from him not only moral and political knowledge, but also was instructed in those more secret and profound branches of science. So here we get that Aristotle had educated Alexander in morals and political knowledge. Okay, now we're going to look at a little bit more here concerning Alexander. It is said the wife of Darius was one of the most beautiful women, as Darius was one of the tallest and handsomest men in the world, and that their daughters much resembled them. But Alexander, no doubt, thought it more glorious and worthy of a king to conquer himself than to subdue his enemies, and therefore never approached one of them. Indeed, his countenance was such that he knew not any woman before his marriage. Oh, whoa, wait a second. Indeed, his countenance was such that he knew not any woman before his marriage, with the exception of Barsine, who became a widow by the death of her husband Memnon, and was taken prisoner near Damascus. She was well versed in Greek literature, a woman of the most agreeable temper, and of royal extraction, for her father Artabazus was grandson to a king of Persia. According to Aristobulus, it was Parmenio that put Alexander upon this connection, with so accomplished a woman whose beauty was her least perfection. Now, this totally contradicts Quintus Curtius, doesn't it? He was sleeping with the Amazon queen, and there's a contradiction here with Diodorus also, isn't there? But this inadvertently backs up what Strabo is saying, doesn't it? Okay, then he goes on to say, as for the other female captives, though they were tall and beautiful, Alexander took no farther notice of them than to say, by way of jest, what eyesores these Persian women are. Ooh. Okay, now we're going to continue on the same page. And let's read what we have here. Now, I thank you for staying with me this long, and now you're going to see how these houses I've been building are just going to all start caving in on top of each other. I'm sorry that it took this long to show you the ancient data, to show you the actual data that can be realized and put into perspective, and now it's all going to come to a head. Philoxenus, who commanded his forces upon the coast, acquainted him, Alexander, by letter, that there was a Theodorus, a Tarentine, with him, who had 2 beautiful boys to sell, and desired to know whether he chose to buy them. Alexander was so much incensed at this application that he asked his friend several times what base inclinations Philoxenus had ever seen in him, that he durst make him so infamous a proposal. In his answer to the letter, which was extremely severe on Philoxenus, he ordered him to dismiss Theodorus and his vile merchandise together. He likewise reprimanded young Agnon for offering to purchase Acrobolus for him, whose beauty was famous in Corinth. Being informed that 2 Macedonians named Damon and Timotheus had corrupted their wives, the wives of some of his mercenaries who served under Parmenio, he ordered that officer to inquire into the affair, and if they were found guilty, to put them to death, as not better than savages bent on the destruction of humankind. In the same letter, speaking of his own conduct, he expresses himself in these terms: for my part, I have neither seen nor desired to see the wife of Darius. So far from that, I have not suffered any man to speak of her beauty before me. He used to say that sleep and the commerce with sex were the things that made him most sensible of his mortality, for he considered both weariness and pleasure as the natural effects of our weakness. There it is. So what do you have here? Can anyone, after seeing this, accuse Alexander of sex with any of the Bagoyim? I hardly think so. But there's more. We're going to start right here. As for his marriage to Roxana, it was entirely the effect of love. He saw her at an entertainment and found her charms irresistible. Nor was the match unsuitable to the situation of his affairs. The barbarians, here barbarians is Persians, placed greater confidence in him on account of that alliance, and his chastity gained their affection. It delighted them to think he would not approach the only woman he ever passionately loved without the sanction of marriage. And his chastity. Continuing. Hephaestion and Craterus were his two favorites. So wait a minute. I thought Bagoas was his favorite. That's what we see online today, isn't it? Or the online resources claim that Bagoas was a favorite of Alexander. But I don't see Bagoas here, do you? The former praised the Persian fashions and dressed as he did. The latter adhered to the customs of his own country. He, Alexander, therefore employed Hephaestion in his transactions with the barbarians, and Craterus to signify his pleasure to the Greeks and Macedonians. The one had more of his love, and the other more of his esteem. He was persuaded indeed, and he often said, Hephaestion loved Alexander and Craterus the king. Does this mean Hephaestion danced in the sack with Alexander? Does it? The one had more of his love. Does that mean that they were dancing in the sack? But the translations after World War II sure do kind of bend that, don't they? They sure bend that. But here it is, 1840. I think not. Now we're going to go to page 289. Here we see more people Alexander loved. And I'm sure this isn't in the book about Alexander's lovers, but right here it is. Talking about Hephaestion and Craterus. Now, here they are. They're having a dispute. And Alexander loved them so much. He says, hey, you guys have a quarrel again. I'm putting you both to death. But here, that he loved them more than all the men in the world. Does that mean he had sex with all the men in the world? No. But if he perceived them at variance again, he would put them both to death, or him, at least, who began the quarrel. Let's go down a little bit further here. Looking at it, among the Macedonians, Philotas, the son of Parmenio, had great authority, for he was not only valiant and indefatigable in the field, but after Alexander, no man loved his friend more or had a greater spirit of generosity. Does this mean that Alexander was just dancing in the sack with all of his top commanders? We're not finished yet. Let's jump up to page 309. And now we're going to see Alexander's affection for boys. He was devoted to boys. Alexander was madly devoted to boys. And here it is, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. The 30,000 boys whom he left under proper masters were now grown so much and made so handsome in appearance, and what was of more importance, had gained such an activity and address in their exercises that he was greatly delighted with them. But it was a matter of uneasiness to the Macedonians. They were apprehensive that the king would have less regard for them. Therefore, when he gave the invalids their route to the sea in order to their return, the whole army considered it as an injurious and oppressive measure. He has availed himself, said they, beyond all reason, of the services, and he sends them back with disgrace, and turns them upon the hands of their country and their parents. Ooh. Okay. Let's look at the next page. Let's continue with this. In a very different condition from that, from that in which he received them. Why does he not dismiss us all? Why does he not reckon all the Macedonians incapable of service? Now he has got his body of young dancers. And this is figurative. This is an insult that the Macedonians are clamoring about the young boys that he's trained and skilled. Let him go with them and conquer the world. And then it talks about Alexander getting really ticked off at him, and how they all made restitution with each other. But these were boys that were trained as warriors. And yeah, young dancers, but it's all figurative. Now we're going to go down here. We're going to go down here, and we're going to start at this red dot. Okay? Right here. At the same time, he signified his pleasure to Antipater, that at all public diversions they should have the most honorable seats in the theaters, and wear chaplets of flowers there, and that the children of those who had lost their lives in his service should have their father's pay continued to them. You want to read it again? The children of those who had lost their lives in his service should have their father's pay continued to them. And what do you have there? You have the first historical record of no child left behind. And imagine for a moment the realization of knowing your children would be taken care of if you were to be slain in battle, or to fall ill, or to be wounded and then die. Imagine what that would do to the mindset of every warrior on the battlefield. Yes, Alexander was madly devoted to boys, and most likely girls, of the soldiers slain in his service. Now, I got to work backwards again. Remember Diodorus Siculus? This is taken from Diodorus, Volume 8, page 441, Book 17, Chapter 110. We read it. Since there were by now sons of the Macedonians born of captive women, he determined the exact number of these. There were about 10,000, and he set aside for them revenues sufficient to provide them with an upbringing proper for freeborn children, and set over them teachers to give them their proper training. Wow. I tell you what, just think today if we had a general or a president that was as devoted to children as Alexander the Great was. Alexander Magnus, the greatest. Okay, we've given you this presentation on a platter. Yes, it is obvious. It's proven. Alexander Magnus was madly devoted to boys. But let's digress for just a bit more to drive the point home and blow this whole notion right out of the water for all time's sake, because I feel that this video will live long after Paul and I have passed away. And it needs to be done now, because what you're going to have in the future, here I am predicting the future again, which I'm always very accurate at predicting the future. Everybody knows that. Is you're going to have these Puto, ancient historian, these scholars, putting in their own agenda to it, and they're going to have the whole dadgum army, all these ancient armies, all Puto. They're going to have, there's already the Crusaders were Puto. You're going to have these Puto scholars having all of these ancient historians, these classical historic writers. You're going to have all them as Puto also. What they do is they're going to find some little way to twist in their agenda, and then the next guy's going to quote for it, then it's going to be repeated, then it's going to be footnoted, and then 100 years from now you're going to have all these guys that are Puto. So that's why it needs to stop now. And at this time I want to make another expression. There was no need for me to show the works of Justin, the last of the 5 classical authors, mainly because he doesn't mention any Bagoas. But I want you to know, Justin's Latin is quite polished and displays a more recent Latin grammar than the ancient masters before him. I had spent many hours breaking down the Latin of Quintus Curtius and was going to show you step by step, word for word, what each meaning could be or was, when I noticed something quite peculiar. And that was that there were no abbreviations anywhere. All the other Latin writers of his time used abbreviations constantly in their historical books. So I brought this up to Paul, and he confirmed his initial suspicion as he was studying the Latin grammar and syntax of both Justin and Curtius. He noticed Quintus Curtius's Latin was even more polished than Justin's. Well, how could this be? Curtius is writing 200 to 250 years before Justin, yet Justin's polish of Latin grammar isn't as refined as Quintus Curtius's. This didn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense. So here I go again, working backwards. After all those hours I put into the Latin, our suspicions were on the line and put to the test. So hang on, as we go for one last final round, okay? Now, we're going to first of all look back at the frontispiece of the inside cover of Quintus Curtius out of the Harvard Loeb Library, the Loeb Classical Library. Let's look at it again and see if you noticed this the first time. See if you noticed anything peculiar. Quintus Curtius was apparently a rhetorician who lived in the 1st century of the Roman Empire and early in the reign of Claudius, AD 41 to 54. He wrote a history of Alexander the Great in 10 books in clear and picturesque style for Latin readers. The first 2 books have not survived. Our narrative begins with events in 333 BC, and there is material missing from books 5, 6, and 10. One of his main sources is Plutarch, who about 300 BC had made Alexander's career a matter of marvelous adventure. Okay, bear with me here. Curtius arranged his material well enough, but is not a critical historian. And in his desire to entertain and to stress the personality of Alexander, he over-elaborates effective scenes, omits much of what is important for history, and does not worry about chronology or political organization, not being himself a politician. He has, moreover, little expert knowledge of military matters or geography. That's the Harvard way of saying he was ignorant. He was stupid, okay? But he does not invent things, watch it here, except speeches and letters inserted into the narrative by traditional habit. Oh, well, isn't that a paradox? We're saying he does not invent things, but then we're saying, yes, he does invent things. Right there it is, all right? I copy more than I believe, he says. 3 special features of his story are narrative of exciting experiences, development of a hero's character, and a disposition to moralize. Right? There's Hegelian dialect coming in. To moralize? Absolutely not. It's to immoralize. To immoralize. There it is. All right, now let's look at this is from the my 1929 Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, Hubbard is working backwards. I'm working backwards. So bear with me on this. All right, because the house is going to collapse here in no time. Let's read it together. Quintus Curtius Rufus, biographer of Alexander the Great. Modern authorities regard him as a rhetorician who flourished during the reign of Claudius, AD 41 to 54. His work, De Rebus Gestis Alexandri Magni, originally consisted of 10 books, of which the first 2 are entirely lost, and the remaining 8 are incomplete. The work is uncritical and shows ignorance of geography, chronology, and military matters. Now see, Britannica, they're going to go ahead and come out. Yeah, the guy's stupid. Ignorance of geography, chronology, and military matters. Well then, pray tell, what is an ancient historian supposed to record then? If he can't get geography, chronology, and military matters correct, what do you get correct? All right, the frontispiece of the Harvard Classic there, it's like it's an apology. It's an apology. This is our apology for everything that he gets wrong. Everything. Now, got one last cookie to throw at you, and this is the kicker. Remember, we wonder, why is Quintus Curtius's Latin so much more polished than Justin's Latin? Yet Justin was writing 200 to 250 years after Quintus Curtius. All right? Now, this is taken from 1878 American Encyclopedia. 1878. Hubbard is working backwards. Quintus Curtius Rufus, a Roman historian, according to some critics, contemporary with Vespasian. Okay, Vespasian, that's 20-25 years after Claudius. I could see that. I could see that. But then again, this is 1878. This is way beyond the other things that we have seen. According to others with Constantine. And there you have it. Constantine was early 4th century AD, the early 300s, right up to like 325 or so. There it is. Let's look at it again. A Roman historian, according to some critics, contemporary with Vespasian, according to others with Constantine. And you wonder why? His history, entitled De Rebus Gestis Alexandri Magni, consisted originally of 10 books, but the first 2 have perished, and the 8 that remain are by no means perfect. It is written in a pleasing, though inflated style, and look at this closely, and is not a good historical authority. It is not a good historical authority. That's going back in time. That's going back to 1878, where these masters that were writing these books back then, our encyclopedia sets, they didn't have nobody to protect. They did not have an agenda. Their agenda was truth. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We call bogus on the history of Quintus Curtius Rufus. It is always, without exception, the syntax that will give you away every time. Paul and I have busted other supposed classical ancient writers, and now you can add this to our list of buffoonery. This isn't the first. This proves beyond a shadow of doubt Curtius is a hoax and should never have been considered as a reliable source for history. The book is now closed on the issue, and now you know why I didn't bother breaking down every word in Latin. Paul insisted to me, saying, "Harry, do what you do best, attack the source and blow it wide open." There is no more to say concerning this subject, and there never will be. For all you wannabe scholars out there who have cast such a dark and sinister cloud over the greatest warrior who ever lived, shame on you. One last piece of candy. Remember when Orsines says to Bagoas just before being killed, he says again, he goes, "I had heard that women once reigned in Asia. This, however, is something new for a eunuch to reign." And I pointed out, I said, well, how come he didn't know about the other Bagoas, Bagoas number 2? Well, guess what? The reason is because the story never happened. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and we hope we have smashed your paradigms again. I must apologize for the length of time it took to show you all this, and I for sure want to apologize for saying the word all right at least 1,000 times. But you know, that's all right. And this has been probably one of my more challenging productions in a long time, because most of my material is just straight off the cuff. But this one required hours of homework from both of us in order to include all we wanted to show you. And be sure to see other educational videos on the Harry Hubbard YouTube channel. And more are going to be added online very soon. And gosh, please, for mercy's sake, you got to remember the line in the Oliver Stone film. Alexander, you've made me so happy. So very, very happy. You've made me more happy than I've ever been. You made me so happy. Thank you.